Thank you for appearing on the show. I'd like to introduce Andrew Dreschner from Mercury Wealth Management, who's here to tell us about insurance.
Thank you, Kerry. Thanks for inviting me.
No worries, it's a pleasure. And Andrew, you're a practitioner. You've had many clients through your doors. Can you tell us of a client who maybe should have had life insurance and didn't, and what was the consequence of that?
Yeah, it's a particular case sort of does come to mind. I had a client who was basically aged in his 40s. So he had two children, teenage children, sort of just about finished schooling. Had a wife, so, the wife was in the sort of late 40s as well. We sat down and did an analysis of insurance in terms of what cover he should have in place. Sat down and presented the advice. Then the client actually decided that the level of cover, basically the cost was too much for him. So he decided not to proceed. And I actually found out through the grapevine that this client actually had an accident, which actually 6 months down the track. And this client believed he had enough cover within his superannuation plan so that his family would be okay. But he only had a minimum amount within that particular plan. So basically he was in the position where the wife had quit work to look at easing into retirement, but she had to basically go back to work to fund the rest of the mortgage, and so it was a bit of a tragic tale, really.
They're quite common, these sort of tales. I remember I had a client who had refused cover.
Okay.
They're quite common, these sort of tales. I remember I had a client who had refused cover.
Okay.
They were just married and they were sort of striving to buy a property, and they couldn't justify the expense, but he was killed a month later in a bulldozer accident built in the ring road.
Okay.
Fortunately, he hadn't had children at that point, otherwise it would have been tragic rather than just terrible.
Yeah.
Let's stay on the negative side first, and we'll finish
Okay.
more positively. In
Yep.
terms of total and permanent disability,
Yep.
could you give us a story about someone who should have maybe had it and didn't, and again, what were the consequences?
This particular client, once I guess with TPD, some clients, I guess, are turned off due to the cost. Again, this particular client, he had a small amount of cover in place. We recommended the right amount for him, and he basically told us, I'm better off putting that money, I think his exact words, towards a boat, because he could see that as an immediate need, as opposed to he just couldn't get his head around the need for cover. And he actually had the case where he had a back injury. So he had the case in terms of his disc, he had an operation on his back, and he was unable ever to work again. So once again, he really needed that cover. We recommended that he put it under super, so the cost, I thought, was pretty reasonable for that amount of cover. But yeah, he chose not to go ahead. So that was unfortunate again, in terms of that situation.
So he had to sell his boat anyway.
That's right. So he didn't get to keep the boat for very long, that's for sure.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's a real balance between benefit and cost, isn't it?
True.
We've spoken about the consequences of not having it and the probability which relates to the cost of insurance.
Yep.
Let's be a bit more positive now.
Okay, good.
Somebody who had life insurance and needed it, and why that worked out well for them.
Well, this particular client, I guess it sort of brings back memories because it's one of the first client claims that I actually dealt with. This client was actually pretty young. He was just age 30. And he actually it was a tragic accident. He was playing rugby union and he actually snapped his neck in terms of his spine. So it was, of course, very sudden, very unexpected. Now, I was actually dealing with this client's parents because they came in. Like a lot of people, this particular gentleman had a number of different super funds, and he actually had some life insurance under the super fund. Now, I guess in a certain extent it was fortunate because he didn't have kids, and so he didn't have those dependents. But of course his parents were still very distressed and upset, and they didn't realise he had any cover in place. So we were able to, I guess, assist them with the claim, so that they were paid out that benefit, and that just helped them to pay for the costs. And actually, they were able to give that money to his siblings as well to help them out. So it had a bit of a positive outcome in the end then, because the family was, looked after there.
Yes, it certainly makes a tragic period more easily dealt with, I guess.
At least it gives people choices in terms of, what medical so they can pay for in terms of what expenses they can pay for, in terms of it allows the survivors choices in terms of what they can do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a similar story in relation to total and permanent disability, Andrew?
In terms of payout, the client that I do recall for this particular lady, we actually recommended a TPD policy. We put it in place, and she was particularly young. She was only in her 30s, and she'd only had the policy in place for around that sort of 6-month sort of period. And she actually came down once again. I believe she had cancer in terms of as an illness, but that actually led to depression. And so, you know, all these things were sort of combined. She had some family issues as well. And so it turned out that she just was not able to work again in terms of the depression. So she was diagnosed by 2 doctors. It went on for quite a while, but she ended up getting a payout from the TPD, which was good for her because it allowed her to pay off the debt and just allowed her to have a better existence and a better standard of life. So.
Thank you. These are the areas where total and permanent disability actually work. The 2 examples that Andrew has given us are of back complaint and depression. And neither of those 2 events would be covered by a trauma policy, which we'll cover in the next show. Andrew, thank you very much for coming and being with us. Thank you for being our expert.
Thank you, Kerry.
And we'll run into you again, I'm sure.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.